say this is a lot more fun when we've got a group of people in front of us instead of some weeks where there's 3 or 4. So thank y'all for being here. Hello, friends, and welcome to the March 11th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for Texans of faith to learn about public policy issues here in the great state of Texas and talk a little bit about how you can engage in that process. My name is Scott Atnip, Texas Impact's Outreach Director, and I am excited today to be joined by a large group of friends from Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas. Y'all say hey. All right. I certainly appreciate your willingness to come down, and I know it's a lot more fun to be doing this in front of a large group of passionate advocates for justice, so thank you again for being here. Later this morning, we will welcome to the panel their senior pastor, Dr. Frederick Haynes, as well as Texas Impact board member from Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary, Dr. Asante Todd, and Adrian Shelley from Public Citizen, who will be having a conversation about justice, particularly eco-justice and climate issues. For those who tune in, who have tuned in the past, you'll remember that during the legislative session, we'll start with a topic of the week. And so we're going to talk about climate and environmental issues today. And we typically follow that with a conversation or a legislative update for the week and an action alert. We're going to change the order a little bit today for a number of reasons, but joining us off the top today is Josh Houston, Texas Impact's Director of Government Affairs. Josh, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
You're not nervous in front of this big room, are you?
Nah, it's awesome.
I'm just kidding.
Fired up.
Great. For those who are listening live, please make sure that you share this content with your friends. You can weigh in with questions that we'll try to get to later in the day by using the hashtag WeeklyWitness. But Josh, the question we usually ask at the end, what's going on this week?
Well, thanks for taking me out of order. I had a meeting I had to run to at 1, so I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much. This week, it's March, so it's getting into, March Madness, if you will, where the committees are really getting moving. Things are starting to look like they're going to go to the floor. So right off the bat, let's talk about the action alert a little bit. That is kind of the big bill of the week. Senate Bill 15, a bill we talked a little bit about last week. Last week we kind of said, hey, we may have the bathroom bill 2.0 here. Stay tuned. Yeah. And here we are again. Yeah, stay tuned. The lawyers have weighed in on it. We were kind of waiting for a little bit of that from the employment law people to kind of affirm a reading of it. Let things kind of shake out over the week as things do. Some people have looked at it. So let me kind of back up. What was Senate Bill 15? What is Senate Bill 15? And do a little bit of that. So when it was initially filed, what this bill would have done is it basically said cities cannot regulate things, employment law matters such as sick leave and living wages and minimum wages and things of that nature. It has arisen because Austin and City of San Antonio have done things to make paid sick leave required for businesses in their city limits. That led the business community to really react to it, and it was initially their bill where they were trying to preempt cities from doing that kind of thing. It was not a great bill to begin with. It was very anti-local control. The answer is if you don't like what Austin or San Antonio did, just go to Round Rock or Bernie. That's why we have suburbs. If these things are really such a detriment and it's not really that far out from where you are, or if you have capital improvements and you can't just move them, we have elected officials for a reason. Participate in the policy process. Democracy is a good thing. We value democracy over capitalism sometimes when those things rarely, but sometimes do push come to shove. Well, the business community lost control of their own bill. When it got to committee, there was an amendment. It's not unusual to have what's called a committee substitute for a bill come up in committee. But in this particular case, there was in the initial version, the filed version, a provision of the bill that explicitly exempted non-discrimination ordinances that cities have in place. In other words, for race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, any number of reasons like that, cities have put in non-discrimination ordinances to protect those people from discriminative practices where the state has not acted. Well, when they have, in the committee substitute, removed that provision, allowing for such discrimination. So we were having the employment lawyers look at it. They weighed in on it. There have been numerous opinions, 2 of them from law professors. All of them pretty much agree that what the bill now does by removing that language is allows private employers to discriminate for any number of reasons: hiring, firing, the provision of health insurance to spouses, the provision of health insurance for special groups like the trans community, the ability to discriminate based on family leave for certain marriages and not other marriages. So it allows for a lot of unequal treatment on the LGBT issues, in addition to being kind of a stinker for low wage earners who need things like paid sick leave. So the bill has just gotten really bad. We've had some local polling come out, not some local polling, but some polling data come out on statewide officials and what they think about local control. It was overwhelmingly in favor of letting cities do what cities do, because the public really gets, yeah, I elect my local people, and if a business doesn't like it, you can just go to the next suburb down the street. So this is a big attempt by the state to take away the ability for local voters to weigh in on local issues. This poll was done by Mike Basiles. This is a little bit of trivia, but that is a person who he's a Republican pollster. He's been a Republican pollster for several decades, and a well-known one for those that exist in this community. So it's a very credible poll. Also, the election that we just had in November, and again, even going back to the March primaries, we're very clear about what the public and the voters think about these kind of purity purges that happen in party primaries, which is really what this is kind of aimed at. Very clear that we don't know, the public doesn't want a bathroom bill 2.0. So the strategy here is it's already out of committee. It's on the Senate intent calendar. Well, it's a way of saying that it could come up on the floor of the Senate at any moment. So the action item is to call your state senator, especially if your state senator is Senator Seliger, Senator Schwartner, Senator Nelson, Senator Taylor, Senator Flores, or Senator Lucio. Those 6 are especially critical, and the ask is just block this bill. Don't let this bill come up on the intent calendar. This is not a priority item. We don't believe in non-discrimination. We don't believe in discrimination. I got that backwards. Too many negatives.
You're making me worried there.
Let's be real clear about that. We don't believe in discrimination. This is not a thing that the state of Texas wants. It's bad for business. This bill just needs to be blocked.
And so you can find that action alert if you go to the Weekly Witness page on the Texas Impact website. Go to texasimpact.org, click on Weekly Witness. At the bottom of the page, you'll find our action alert. On that page, you can find talking points on Senate Bill 15. You'll find a list of toll-free numbers that we would encourage you to use when you make those telephone calls, so we can track the number of calls going into each office. And we'd encourage you today to make a telephone call, and especially if you're in one of those 6 Senate districts, organize all of your friends to do the same. As Josh said, this was a bad bill, blocking local governments from providing living wages or dealing with hiring practices in their local communities, and it got even worse at the end of last week when they added the non-discrimination ordinances to that. So make a telephone call today and organize your friends to do the same. If you have questions about that, you can reach out to me at scott@texasimpact.org. What else is going on this week, Josh? That's the big news, but we've got some other things we're watching. Yeah,
that's the big one. Let's switch to committees. So the only big opposed is Senate Bill 15. All the other bills in committee, let me make sure that's 100% true. Yeah, they're all supports. So let's talk about what's in committee this week, what people should be also calling on. So Monday today, so call today, we have 2 very good bills up in committee, 2 very different bills. One in the House Criminal Jurisprudence Committee, so it's a criminal justice bill. House Bill 1202 by Representative Collier, actually Chair Collier. It's her committee and her bill. What this bill, so there's been a practice with rent-to-own items, where with rent-to-own items, the definition of theft in the penal code is very broad. And so a lot of these rent-to-own companies will attempt to do debt collection by filing criminal charges. These are 2 different things, right? Debt is a civil issue, not a criminal issue. Someone does not need a criminal record following them around the rest of their lives because they were just poor and couldn't pay back a rent-to-own item. So this bill would clarify that definition of theft to make sure that we're not casting too wide a net and having this statute misused to go after people who were just poor. Let's switch gears to Senate Bill 6. This is in Senate Water and Rural Affairs. It is up for a hearing today. This is a great big bill I think you'll be hearing more about. It has to do with Hurricane Harvey and how we respond to disasters, the management, response, and recovery that we do with regard to disasters. It is big. It is going to be one of the big items for the session, I think, with Hurricane Harvey. It is a good bill to support, and we'll just say, leave it at that. We may talk more about it in future sessions, future podcasts, but for right now, it's just a good support bill. On Tuesday, in the House Human Services Committee, we have two good bills, a House Bill 1647 by Representative Deschantel. This has to do with, and we've talked about it in past podcasts, the dental benefit and expanding it to the disabled community, so that we can, for a couple $100, deal with the cavity, deal with the cleaning, and really avoid really expensive and really horrible issues with abscesses and other dental health issues that lead to much bigger problems down the road and much more expensive problems. It's one of those bills where the right thing to do is also the fiscally conservative thing to do, so why in the world wouldn't we do it? House Bill 342 by Representative Cortez. This is a bill up for hearing in that same committee, also in House Human Services tomorrow. One of the things that we do, that Texas does to decrease the number of people on the rolls, is to make somebody basically re-up their health insurance for children every 6 months, and for Medicaid every 6 months. And it's just a bureaucratic roadblock that they put in the way of people to try to trip them up and get them off the rolls. This bill provides for 12-month eligibility. Very important, so that you're only having to re-up your health insurance with Medicaid once per year, not twice per year. Keeping people so they don't have disruptions in mental health. They don't have disruptions in prescription drugs. They don't have disruptions in the provision of health care that they're receiving. All because of some bureaucratic roadblock that they've put in the way. So support House Bill 342 by Cortez. We have, let's switch over to House Business and Industry. This is also a hearing on Tuesday. We have a very good bill. We talked about this bill last week, actually, over on the Senate side. It was a Senate bill that has to do with when the kinds of documents that survivors of domestic violence can provide to their landlord to help them terminate their lease. So one of the biggest obstacles for survivors of domestic violence is that often that their name is stuck on that apartment lease with the abusive spouse or the abusive partner, and they have trouble getting new housing because they're stuck on that lease with their old housing. So this expands the number of documents that they can provide to terminate that lease to mental health, health care, and shelters. Can help get them out of their lease, so that it doesn't have to be a full-blown police report to get them out of their lease. The Senate version, the hearing went very well. It is out of committee and on the local calendar, which means there shouldn't be any opposition. The the apartment association has been supportive of it. So now we are moving the House version on the House side to get that bill moving as well. That House bill number is 1629. By Representative Morrison. There's actually 5 bills that are substantially similar, but House Bill 1629 is the true companion. The reason that's important is arcane, but it helps speed things up in the legislative process, so we're choosing to focus on that one because this is a thing we really want to get done. Hopefully both bills get moving. This is a little in the weeds, but from a legislative procedure standpoint, we want to get the House bill on the calendar. We hope the Senate bill is what's called over and eligible, and then you can sub it out and get it done. It's a short circuit to kind of get a bill through the process in a hurry. And of course, things get weird as the session reaches the end. And so if you really find a bill, if you really want your bill to pass, the best thing to do is to get it moving quickly. So this is a way to get it moving quickly. That's House Bill 1629 in Business and Industry. Looking ahead to Wednesday in Senate Transportation, a committee we don't often get to work with is the Transportation Committee. Nevertheless, Senate Bill 538 by Senator Nathan Johnson is up for a hearing. This is a bill that has to do with creating an exemption from the fee, so no money, for homeless youth to get their state ID. I know a lot of congregations will do various ministries to help people get their ID. I know I did this when I was in seminary. IDs being one of the biggest obstacles to a job, one of the biggest obstacles to basically just being a member of society. So this bill would make it to where if you are a youth and you are homeless, often like foster care, you have the same issue with kids coming aging out of foster care, making sure that they don't have to pay a fee so that they can begin to be self-sufficient adults. Thursday, there are two bills in the last two bills for the week in the House Corrections Committee. You have House Bill 812 by the chairman of that committee, James White. So a few years back, I think it was in the 2011 budget crisis, one of the things that they did for people in prison is they made them begin to pay a $100 copay in order to access health care services in prison. This is a huge obstacle because how in the world do you work when you're in jail? There are things you can do, but of course they don't pay minimum wage, so it's almost like it's just barely better than convict labor. What this bill does is it lowers it again to a $3 copay. From $100 to $3, it makes it much more manageable for inmates who are in prison to make sure that they can get health care, health treatment when they're in prison. This is a really good bill. I hope it gets moving, so that would be a call to the House Corrections Committee to support House Bill 812. And then House Bill, also in House Corrections on Thursday, 1191, so 1191. This is a bill by Representative Jarvis Johnson. What it does is it's a study bill, but one of the things that they want to study is the number of inmates that are in our correction system who have a history as a child of being in our CPS system, our Child Protective Service system. Really, we've talked about, have talked about the pipeline from school to prison. This is looking at the pipeline from our foster care system to prison. So that, I mean, we can't, it's a study bill, but you can't really make good policy without good data, and we don't have good data. So trying to find good data so that we can come back in a subsequent session and find solutions to try to reduce this thing that should not be. Those are the bills for the week. Scott, thanks, that's all I have.
All right. Well,
thanks for taking me first.
Yeah, appreciate your work and good luck in your meetings this afternoon. As Josh exits the stage, we have one question. Maybe can you grab Kathy on the way out? Looks like she has a question.
Yeah. I'll head.
Yeah, so Kathy asked if we could get those bill numbers, and I'll get those from Josh, and we'll get them on the weekly witness page later today. Or if you need them quicker than that, you can email me again at scott@texasimpact.org. But I would go ahead and I would like to introduce our next three speakers as they make their way to the table. We are very excited today to have with us the senior pastor from Friendship West Baptist Church, Dr. Frederick Haynes III. That's nice. I think I'm going to start bringing my own cheering section with me when I go places too. That's nice. We also have with us Dr. Asante Todd, I've mentioned is on the Texas Impact Board. Asante, they like you as well, so congratulations. And let's see if the third panelist also gets an applause. Adrian Shelley from Public Citizen, pressure's on. All right. So we have sold today as a conversation on climate and economic justice issues. But Dr. Haynes, I wanted to ask you first to kind of set a theological foundation for the day. You've got a great crowd of people who made the really long trek by bus and cars from Dallas to come do this advocacy work. Why is this an important part of your ministry, of the church's ministry, to engage in this justice work?
And thank you so much. I appreciate not only the work of Texas Impact, but especially this time that you've allowed us to have this conversation. For us, it's crucial as a people of faith who believe in a ministry of justice that we not focus only on cleaning up spider webs, but we've got to address the spider. And in our community, when you look at the whole concept of justice, eventually we're going to have to deal with the climate. And in dealing with the climate, we discover that so much of what ails communities of color, so much of what plagues people who are impoverished has to do with residential segregation. So David Walker of Harvard speaks of the fact that our life expectancy is not determined by our genetic code, but the zip code. And so zip code injustice, in a real sense, is often connected to environmental injustice. When you look at the fact that residential segregation places certain communities in close proximity to gas and oil refineries. As a matter of fact, Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma are the leading states in that order that have, in a disproportionate fashion, African Americans located in proximity to those kinds of oil and gas locations. Now, what that gives birth to: asthma, cancer. I read a stat coming down here that black children die from cancer 10 times more than white children. Black children are hospitalized 4.5 more times than white children from asthma. And so all of that is enough to let us know that theologically we need to go back to Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created. We believe that for real. And then to think that God then gave us what? Stewardship over nature. And in giving us stewardship over nature, there's a passage where it talks about God said subdue, rule. And that's been misused via a gospel of greed. And that gospel of greed has really just misconstrued the original word. The original word was also used for a shepherd caring for, serving the sheep, because the life of a shepherd is connected to the health of the sheep. And so if we're going to do this thing right, we must recognize that we are the shepherds of nature who have stewardship over nature, and our health, our life is connected vitally to how we treat the planet. And so unfortunately, we live in a state that, again, the gospel of greed blinds us to these realities. And the bottom line is, as people of faith who believe in justice, it's hard to believe in justice when we talk about, okay, those who are suffering because of this, that, and the other, and we don't deal with the root cause, the spider, which is climate change, environmental injustice. And so that's why that's why we're here. We're here because we believe that Texas has a responsibility to the least of these. And as people of faith, and I'll give you one more biblically, Jesus put the spotlight on the Jericho Road. He names the Jericho Road in response to a question about loving one's neighbor. And so the spotlight of the Jericho Road as a place that is unhealthy, because it was known in biblical antiquity that the Jericho Road was dangerous. And so for the Savior to name it is to put the spotlight on it and say, okay, I'm not just concerned about someone who does good on the road. I'm saying we need to deal with the road. And so what we're here to do today in Austin is to say we're here to deal with the road. And the road is dangerous, the road is unhealthy, and when you look at cancer rates and asthma rates in communities of color that already have a lack of access to health care, it's like it's a snowball effect of injustice that I think we as a people of faith need to address.
So you've talked about injustice and the impact that it has on real people's lives. I remember last legislative session somebody talked about climate issues and environmental justice as being about some polar bears somewhere else. Dr. Todd, bringing you in on the conversation, how does this impact real people in real communities?
Thank you, Scott, first of all, and thank you, Texas Impact, for having me out today. I think Dr. Haynes was already talking on it. He was talking about the ways in which the zip code is more significant than the genetic code. And I would say that that's exactly right. There's a scholar by the name of Melanie Harris who does some work at the intersection of African American women.
She's a member of Friendship West.
And environmental. Oh, she's a member of y'all's church. Okay, all right. So I'm circling back around. And so y'all already know then,
We'll
right?
ask him later if he knew that.
I did not know that. Y'all already know then that Dr. Harris wants to talk about what she calls the parallel oppressions between nature and the environment and African American women and women of color, right? So essentially what Dr. Haynes was talking about, anytime there is an oppression of nature or the environment, 9 times out of 10, and I might even say 10 times out of 10, that oppression is happening along with oppression of people of color, right? So anytime there's an issue with water, chances are it's affecting African American communities. Anytime there's an issue with food growth, right? Food supply or food sovereignty, all these things, food deserts, these are affecting people in communities of color. And so what I want to lift up again is the parallel oppressions between the way we treat the environment and the way that we treat people of color, so that really this is a multi-dimensional issue that we have to deal with, right? How do we, on one hand, begin to acknowledge and appreciate the world, the nature, the creation that God has entrusted to us, and at the same time, how do we learn to appreciate and extend a hand of fellowship to our brothers and sisters across racial and cultural lines, right? These are connected, so that what we need really is like Dr. Haynes said it once again, to fix the road, right? And part of that road is desegregating many of our communities in our neighborhoods along lines of race and class, right? And I think that goes a long way in helping us have some of these conversations at a real level.
So how do we encourage churches and clergy to lead on this issue? There seems to be a disconnect sometimes between talking about environmental justice and particularly the impacts on racial justice. How do we encourage our churches and clergy to lead on that? How do we make that connection?
I think one of the first things we can do as preachers, as pastors, as scholars, is to return to our old religious language about the ways in which God has created the world, right, for us to be stewards over. Now, as Dr. Haynes mentioned, none of our theology is perfect, right? So we've also got to begin to look again at some of the things we say about the relationship between God and the world. For example, Dr. Haynes brought out, we often lift up Genesis 1 as the scripture that gives us dominion over creation, but that has been misused in many cases, so that many people think that dominion means I go out, I take what I want, and it doesn't mean anything until I put my work into it, right? But we need to have a different understanding of dominion, for example, that says God is already at work in the world, right? God is already at work in nature, in the creation, in communities of color. And now whenever I approach these natural resources, if you will, how do I go about appreciating what is already there that cannot be reduced to my own interests, right? Cannot be reduced to the purposes and the utility that I want to bring to this. And so you can see this already has big implications for the way that we think about things like economy and development, right? We got to begin to rethink issues about economy and development, because the way in which we go about acquiring, getting a hold of the natural resources, and the way that we go about displacing people from one region to another so that we can get a hold of land or of certain kinds of natural goods is problematic. Mm-hmm. And so we've got to begin to ask questions about how we are doing development in our communities, how we are thinking about economics, and we really have to begin to have our local citizens, right, whether they are Christians or members of the American democracy, to begin to work together to contribute their voice to the conversation, right? What would it mean if we had a number of different concerned citizens gathering together like they did in the 1960s to have these mass meetings where everyone could come and voice their concerns and get on one accord about some of these issues? I think what we really need is a democratic revival, right, where people are beginning to ask questions and take on responsibility for themselves as agential citizens.
That's good.
Dr. Haynes, any advice you would give to your clergy colleagues about how they can better approach this topic?
Well, I think we need to be purged of our theology that's been informed by capitalism and really go back to a hermeneutic that appreciates God speaking As a matter of fact, one of the passages that is often used is what in Romans, in terms of, okay, before Christ, God was speaking even through nature. So imagine what God is allowed to say now through nature when God's voice has been what? Muffled or given laryngitis because of our disrespect for nature. And again, it's important, if we're going to even have a future, the Bible often is speaking about legacy. So I'm asking us to really take a good look at our theological sense, our biblical sense. And if the Bible talks about legacy and leaving a blessing to future generations, I'm asking myself right now, what are we leaving, for my daughter's children and the children after that and the next generation? And the bottom line is, all of the stats say that by 2030, this planet is in a lot of trouble. And so when you talk about all of creation groaning, it's because we are guilty because of greed, unfortunately, because of a capitalistic consumer mindset that says, let me get whatever I have to get at the expense of the planet, and in so doing, I hurt others. And so, again, for me, it's just really important that we theologically, do we really believe a theology of creation? And that behind creation is a creator who has entrusted us with this creation, that we are not to have dominion over in the sense of taking advantage of it, but instead we're to serve it, because God, in God's genius, it's just phenomenal how God set this earth up. God set this earth up, structured it so that life could give birth to life. And life could give birth to life. And life could strengthen life and give health to life. God has wired the world for life. And yet we're engaging in death-dealing theology. And death-dealing theology is always going to put the individual consuming much at the expense of others. Again, it's a gospel of greed. And so I think theologically, we have to get real serious about Genesis and a theology of creation and our creator who has entrusted creation to us in order for us to have life.
So, go ahead.
Scott, thank you for that, Dr. Haynes. And I just want to also maybe follow up on that by saying that the theology of creation is key. We need to begin to realize that God is a God who has created all space, right? God is the God of all space, and that means that God is even God of the messy and dirty and unsightly spaces that we don't often like to talk about or acknowledge or believe that God is working there, right? And so really, I want to say we need something like a dirty theology. There's a scholar by the name of Anthony Penn who wants to talk about a nitty-gritty theology, a nitty-gritty hermeneutic. In other words, we need to be unafraid of going to the places that have been rejected and cast aside. Why? Because that's where God is doing God's creative work. And that transforms the way that we even view a lot of the things, a lot of the communities and spaces that we take account of in policy, right? For example, if God is already at work in the ghetto or in the projects, right? If God is already at work in these spaces that we have said are natural disaster sites or toxic waste sites, what does that mean about how we then approach and deal with those sites, right? It doesn't mean then that we go in and try to, quote unquote, fix them with the best solutions we have alone. It also means that we already first acknowledge the good things that are there, how God is working there in the first place, and then we ask not how can we impose our will on that area, right, for development or for profit, right? But the first question is, how do we line up with, get in tune with what God is already doing in this space, right? And that may mean we don't get to take all the natural resources out of this region like we want to.
Right. And that may mean in public policy that we're very careful with how we decide who will live where. I mean, the bottom line is that segregation in this country continues as a result, as a product of public policy. And unfortunately, you have communities that are in floodplains, in tornado alleys that have been set up. And now when you look at, again, environmental injustice and the fact that, there are those who, for, again, greedy reasons, ignore the scientific evidence of climate change. And now we are seeing tornadoes busting out in ways we haven't seen before. And there are certain communities in this country alone that are going to be susceptible in the years ahead to massive flooding. And it's all because, again, ignoring the science and divorcing, I like this, science from a theology of creation, as if God is scared of science. And I just don't worship a God who's running away from science.
So I know you're going to be doing the invocation this afternoon. Many of the people in the room will be making legislative visits this afternoon. What do you hope people who are listening will do next?
When they hear the invocation?
Well, but from the conversation today, I know what a couple of you are doing next. But for those listening, what do you hope that they'll do in the weeks and months to come?
Well, and this is a topic that most don't like to get into, but at the root of environmental injustice, in many instances, is the uniting in holy wedlock of greed and racism. And as long as greed and racism continue to unite in unholy wedlock, they're going to give birth to injustice. And that injustice is also going to preclude possibilities for this whole country, for our whole state. And so, I mean, just think. There was a movie out years ago called Waiting to Exhale, real popular in our community. And now we're hating to inhale because of the environment we find ourselves in. But if toxins in my community get caught up in the wind, eventually they're going to hit some of the richer communities. And so why would you be content with thinking you can segregate environmental injustice, knowing that eventually the wind is going to blow? And when the wind blows, it's coming your way. So I'm praying that as a result of our being here, that we will be honest about racism and greed. I'm praying as a result of our being here that we will now have legislative policies that reverse residential segregation. I like what Asante said earlier in terms of communities where people live. Segregation is, if I have a vested interest in a community and it's not determined by color or caste, then that community is going to be the beneficiary of what is healthy. And so I'm hoping when we leave here today that we'll have a Senate and a legislative body that says, okay, we've got to get delivered from racism and greed.
Dr. Todd, anything to add?
It's very difficult, first of all, to add anything to that. Dr. Haynes, as many of y'all know, is on it. I would just, again, emphasize the role of local citizens and community, and we even heard today earlier from Josh, certain legislative procedures or policies that are seeking to disempower local communities, right? So that there may be a certain point where local communities may feel a certain way but will not have the freedom or the capacity to voice their concerns. And so my primary concern is that local communities continue to be able to give voice to those issues that are affecting them, right? What would it mean if the Texas State Legislature were to be able to hear, right, from a group, a constituency, much just like they are hearing from Friendship West Baptist Church on today, to hear from Austin's Colony, right, just north of the city of Austin, that is constituted by a number of communities of color, poor persons, oppressed persons, marginalized, right? So what would it mean for that kind of community to voice their concerns about the water issues they're having, right? These are the ways I think that the community can best respond to the environmental issues, is by being vigilant in their conversations and holding their elected officials accountable to that which they elected them for.
Well, how many of you are ready to respond on this issue? You can make some noise. There's a couple of you, right? Come on now. They're being so nice, trying not to disrupt the podcast. I appreciate that. Adrian Shelley, public citizen, what are we going to be watching for this legislative session?
Well, thanks, Scott. I will get to that, but I think I just kind of have to respond to some of what I've heard so far. So I got to say thank you all for being here. Happy to be a repeat visitor to Weekly Witness, and sure to appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of y'all today, and really appreciate the wisdom that I'm hearing from Dr. Haynes and Dr. Todd today. You know, we really do have to start by rooting these problems, in our faith and in our theology, and understand the foundation that is around us and that has been in place for decades and really even centuries. The question was asked, how do we see today, or how do we look forward and see these problems and their solutions? The reality is we need to look back into our past to see the structures that created these problems in the first place, right? And we've heard some of this already, and there are some concrete examples that we've already heard, and I'm just going to give you a couple more. We heard about cancer rates. The same thing is true of asthma rates. African Americans are 6 times as likely to have asthma, 10 times as likely to die from air pollution. If you are African American, you are 80% of you and your neighbors live within 30 miles of a coal plant, right? And these are systems that were put in place decades ago, centuries ago, and the vulnerabilities that have resulted in those situations are also the vulnerabilities that cause certain communities to be disproportionately impacted. So, for example, we have lower health insurance rates, right? We have more housing vulnerability. One of the biggest, actually the biggest environmental killer is heat, right? Heat exhaustion. And if we live in homes that don't have adequate air conditioning, or if we don't have access in public places to cool, climate-controlled environments, that's a vulnerability that we have to get around. And we also have to appreciate that many of the solutions that are proposed in not obvious or in subtle ways perpetuate some of the inequities or the vulnerabilities that are in place. So, for example, lower income individuals spend more of their income on energy and transportation than do people of higher income. So if the solution increases our transportation costs, if they increase our energy costs, well, that's no solution at all for many of our communities, right? We're fortunate in Texas right now that clean energy, wind energy, solar energy is actually becoming cheaper than coal and natural gas energy, right? So we're in a good place, but we have to recognize that a solution that requires us to spend more on energy, more on transportation, no solution at all, right? So with that, I will move to talking about a couple of bills. I am going to spout some bill numbers here, so if you're taking notes, it's time to get out the pen. Let's see what we have here. First of all, there are some really good bills that stake out the mission to act on climate change. So, for example, Raphael and Chia, House Bill 928, establishing the Texas Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation Commission. Representative Ron Reynolds out of Missouri City, House Bill 1980, creating the Climate Change Impact Assessment Council. We've heard about environmental justice today. Representative Ron Reynolds also has House Bill 1491, which would create the Texas Environmental Justice Advisory Council. Now, these are really excellent bills that stake out the territory on climate change. We're looking to get hearings and to have really good conversations about these bills in the legislature. But there's also bills that have more subtle impacts. You might not appreciate why they're good climate-forward policies, and I just want to point out a couple of those too. So we have some recovery bills for folks who are on the Texas coast who are looking to help our communities recover from the impacts of Hurricane Harvey. We have House Bill 478 by Dade Phelan, which creates a program for infrastructure projects to help us prepare for the next storm. We have House Bill 274 by Sarah Davis, creating a flood infrastructure revolving loan fund. And then we have some bills that are, again, even more subtle and related to those issues that I mentioned earlier, transportation and energy, right? So we have an energy bill. This is a bad bill, unfortunately, by Senator Hall, Senate Bill 1617. We have a tax incentive for certain types of energy projects, and this bill would remove wind and solar projects from that tax incentive. So making it harder to put up wind and solar. And again, 8 in 10 African Americans live within 30 miles of a coal plant. We need to close those coal plants, replace them with wind and solar. Final example I'm going to give, and this is getting real subtle, House Bill 2513 by Mondo Martinez. This bill puts a $300 annual fee on ownership of electric vehicles. Now, vehicles need to pay a fee to pay for our roads and bridges, but for a gas vehicle, that fee is about $100. So a $300 fee for an electric vehicle just makes owning electric vehicles more expensive. And again, if we're going to incentivize clean energy transportation, we need to avoid those sorts of subtle actions that make those things more expensive.
So the last two incentivize non-renewable resources?
Yeah, so those last two bills unfortunately sort of attack renewable resources. Senate Bill 1617 and House Bill 2513. And to be clear, I don't think that the authors of these bills had any bad purpose in mind. It's just that their effect will disproportionately impact, again, those who are energy vulnerable and climate vulnerable.
All right, so we've got just a couple of minutes before people in the room have to start making their way to the Capitol. I'll give each one of you a shot for kind of a closing thought or something you'd like to shamelessly plug. I guess we'll start at that end of the table. Dr. Todd?
Thank you again for having us out on today. It's been great to be a part of this conversation. I'll just maybe say a phrase that I picked up along the way, and that is that the black church must go green. The black church must go green.
Right.
And that is, traditionally in our communities, we have so many issues going on that when we get to issues of climate and environment, that tends to be the last thing on the list. If anything, and many of you in the room know, sometimes that is even cast as a quote-unquote white issue, right?
Right.
The climate and the environment is a white issue, but the truth of the matter is, number one, our people also have had a history with the environment and with nature, right? We have been some of the people who have been working the fields, right? Dealing with the food and all this kind of thing. And so we know the environment, the climate, and nature in ways that others don't. And then secondly, we all live on this planet. And so it's not as if something affects white persons, it's not going to affect us. And 9 times out of 10, as you've been hearing, it normally affects African American communities first if it's a negative effect. And so I just encourage us again, the black church must go green and find ways to connect our faith with environmental issues.
Yeah, I think what Dr. Asante said is on point. The black church has to go green and create and insist on greening our communities.
Yes.
One of the things about Dallas, where we've come from, there are at least 29 landfills south of downtown in Dallas. Another source of sickness that we experience. And so I think it's very important that when we start talking about, because churches now are real fired up about what? Doing good in the community. But you also have to create a good climate or a green climate for the community for you to do good in. Because you can feed hungry people in that community only to watch them die from cancer or asthma after you fed them. And I think God wants us to do better than that.
Thank you. By show of hands, who is leaving here and going over to the Capitol? All right, awesome. Thank you. So we've heard from some professional advocates and from some professional lobbyists here, right? People like Josh, people like myself. We are fortunate that we do this for a living and that we have the issue area expertise in order to do the best job that we can, okay? But that's not why you guys are here today. I'm assuming most of you are not professional advocates, probably don't have, issue area expertise in some of the things that you're going to be advocating on today. Maybe you know a little bit about it, from your work or for your past volunteer work. That's fabulous. But what's important to recognize is you are not here today to be issue area experts, right? You've heard a whole lot about climate and about green advocacy. Nobody's expecting you to have gained expertise that you're going to go drop on these lawmakers over here. This is about your communities and your families, which is where you are the issue area expertise, right? When you come to Austin from elsewhere in Texas, you are bringing your experience, your community's experience, your knowledge about what your needs are, and that is what the lawmakers want to hear from you, right? It is incredibly significant to them that you have taken time out of your week, to come here to Austin and to share what you do have expertise on. It's far more impactful from them to hear these things from you than it is from another professional, lobbyist, if you want to call it that, like me, right? So do not be cowed by what you hear from people. Do not feel like you don't have the experience, you don't have a place there, you don't have something to say to the lawmakers that you're talking to, because you absolutely do. You have the knowledge of your communities, your experience, and your understanding of what needs to be done to make Texas a healthier, safer place for you, your communities, and your families. That is what you are the expert in. That's why you are here. Go over there and do the best job you can with that message, because those folks need to hear it, and they're expecting you to come and tell it to them, okay? Good luck.
All right. So, Asante Todd, Frederick Haynes, Adrian, Shelley, thank you all so much.
Thank you, Scott.
For your ministry each and every day. Thanks for being here today. Friends, whether in the room or watching online or listening by podcast, we have some work to do, and now is the time to get started. You have an action alert. You have some build numbers from today. Make sure you keep an eye on Texas Impact social media and e-news for ways that you can get involved. If you want to sign up for our rapid response team, you can do that at texasimpact.org/take-action. And make sure to share this content with your friends. We need a movement in the state of Texas to transform our communities, transform lives, and we need your help to do that. And remember, if you've made it this far in the conversation, we hope that you value the work of Texas Impact and will support that work by becoming or renewing your membership online at texasimpact.org/join. Next Monday at noon, we'll be broadcasting live from Lutheran and Episcopal Legislative event. It's not too late to sign up for that. You can do so at, I think, texasimpact.org, or email me and I'll send you that registration link. But next week, we will not be here at First United Methodist Church. We'll be on the road. We'll be back here the week after that. Friends, keep up the great work. We'll look forward to seeing you next Monday. Let's get to work.
Thank you.
Thank you all.